Hey everyone, tonight's video is filled with some genuinely creepy, scary, and unsettling stories. So, grab a drink, get comfortable, and maybe don't listen to this one alone in the dark. And before we get into it, if you enjoy videos like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment for the algorithm. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who enjoy this kind of content. I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you. It's been a few years now, and I still catch myself thinking about it when I'm driving alone at night. I was doing general repair work, just a mix of carpentry, minor electrical, fixing up cabins and small properties for people who either didn't live there full-time or rented them out. It paid decently, and I liked that most of the jobs were isolated. No boss hovering over me, no coworkers to deal with. Just me, my tools, and whatever needed fixing. That particular job had me out in a pretty remote, wooded area, like an hour and a half from where I was living then. The kind of place where you lose signal for long stretches, and if your car breaks down, you're probably waiting a while before anyone even drives past. The cabin itself belonged to a guy who only came out there during hunting season, so it had been sitting unused for months. Leaky roof, busted window frame, a few things like that. I'd been there since early morning, and by the time I finished up, it was already getting late in the afternoon. I remember debating whether to just stay the night in the cabin, because technically I could have. It wasn't comfortable, but it was usable. But I had stuff to do the next day, and I didn't feel like waking up out there, so I packed up my tools, loaded everything into my truck, and started heading back. The road out was really more of a narrow dirt trail than an actual road. You couldn't fit two vehicles side by side unless one of them pulled off into the brush, and even that wasn't always possible because of how dense the trees were. I'd driven it earlier that morning, so I knew what to expect. Still, once the sun starts dropping behind the trees, everything out there gets darker faster than you think it will. I had the radio on low, and I remember feeling pretty normal. Tired, a little sore from the day's work, but nothing off. I was just looking forward to getting home, showering, and eating something that wasn't from a gas station. I'd been driving for about 20 minutes when I saw headlights ahead of me. That alone was a little unusual, because I hadn't seen a single other vehicle the entire day. Not while I was working, not on the way in, nothing. So seeing someone coming the opposite direction made me instinctively slow down. As the car got closer, I could tell it wasn't just passing through quickly. It slowed down too, almost like they were being cautious, or maybe just unsure about the narrow path. Eventually, both of us came to a stop facing each other, like 20 or 30 feet apart. I remember thinking, all right, this is normal. One of us just has to back up to a slightly wider spot and let the other pass. I'd already passed a small clearing, maybe a minute behind me, so I figured I'd just reverse back to that. I rolled my window down a bit and leaned out, gesturing with my hand like, hey, I'll back up. Before I could even start reversing, both doors of the other car opened. Two men got out, and this is where things started to feel off. Wrong in a way I couldn't really explain at the time. The first thing I noticed was what they were wearing. It wasn't normal clothing for that kind of area. Long, loose garments, kind of like robes or coats, but not anything I'd seen people casually wear. It reminded me of those low-budget documentaries or movies about religious cults. Just something about the cut and the way it hung on them. They started walking toward my truck without saying anything at first. I remember sitting there for a second, hands still on the wheel, thinking maybe they were just going to ask for directions or something. But the closer they got, the less that made sense. There was no confusion in how they moved. They were coming straight at me, like they already knew exactly what they were doing. One of them came up to my window, the other kind of lingered a step behind him, slightly off to the side. I could smell something as soon as they got close. Alcohol, definitely, but not just that. Something else mixed in that I couldn't place. The one nearest to me leaned down slightly and asked what I was doing out there. His tone wasn't aggressive yet, but it wasn't friendly. Just flat, like he was asking something he already knew the answer to. I told him the truth, that I'd been working on a cabin further down the trail, just doing repairs, and I was heading back home. He just stared at me after I said that. No reaction, The other guy was kind of shifting his weight, looking around, almost like he couldn't stay still. Something wasn't lining up. I said again that I could back up and let them pass. That's when everything changed really fast. The guy at my window suddenly reached in and grabbed the edge of the glass, and before I could react, there was this sharp cracking sound as he smashed it inward. It didn't completely shatter, but it broke enough that pieces fell inside the door and onto the seat. I remember freezing, just trying to process what had happened. Then the other guy stepped forward, and I saw the gun in his hand. It wasn't pointed directly at me at first, angled downward, close enough that the message was clear. They told me to get out of the truck. I didn't try to drive off. Looking back, maybe I could have tried something, but in that moment, with how sudden it all was, it didn't feel like I had any real options. I opened the door and stepped out. The air felt colder outside than it had a few seconds before, or maybe that was just the adrenaline starting to kick in. My hands were already shaking a little, even though I was trying to keep it together. I asked them what this was about. The first guy, the one who broke the window, smiled in a way that didn't look right. Not like someone amused or happy, just off. He asked me if I wanted to join a party. At first, I honestly thought I misheard him. The whole situation didn't match the question at all. I said, "No, I'm just trying to get home." Then he asked if I wanted to eat something. He described it as some kind of meat, said it tasted really good, like I'd never had anything like it before. There was something about the way he said it that made my stomach turn. Like he was trying to sell me on something he thought was genuinely appealing, but completely ignoring how insane the situation was. The other guy laughed a little. It was like he was out of it, or on something stronger than just alcohol. I told them I wasn't interested, that they needed to back off. The guy with the gun shifted it slightly. The first guy stepped closer to me, close enough that I could see the details of his face. Sweat, bloodshot eyes, something smeared along his sleeve that I didn't want to think too hard about. When I told them again to leave me alone, the second guy suddenly moved like he was about to swing at me. It wasn't a clean motion. And this is the part that I still think about, because I don't know if it actually saved me or if things would have ended the same way anyway. I told them my location was being tracked. I said my sister could see exactly where I was through GPS, and that if I stopped moving for too long, she'd call the police. At the time, that wasn't even true. She had tracked me before on long trips, but we hadn't set anything up that day. It just came to me in the moment, like something I could say that might make them hesitate. Neither of them said anything. The guy who had been about to hit me stopped mid-motion, like the idea caught him off guard. The one with the gun looked at the other guy, then back at me. There was this brief pause. Everything felt completely still. Then, without another word, they both backed away. They got back into their car, shut the doors, and slowly reversed down the trail, like they'd suddenly decided it wasn't worth it. I stood there for a few seconds after they left, watching until their headlights disappeared completely. Only then did I get back into my truck. The inside smelled like broken glass and dust. My hands were still shaking when I started the engine again. I didn't stop until I got back into a proper road with actual traffic. I did report it. As soon as I had signal, I called it in and later gave a full statement. Described the men, the car, everything I could remember. Nothing really came of it. No one matched the description. That bothers me, because those two didn't seem lost or random or even just aggressive in a normal way. It felt like they were part of something, like I had just crossed into the wrong place at the wrong time. It didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like I interrupted something I wasn't supposed to see. Whatever it was, I don't think it was just the two of them. I'm Crystal. I was around 30 at the time, just turned or about to, and I had moved out there because it felt like the kind of reset I needed. I'd been working at a clothing shop in town for a few years, a small place that sold everyday stuff, and I had this idea in my head that I could start selling things online, maybe custom pieces or thrifted clothes I altered myself. It wasn't really taking off yet, but I kept telling myself I just needed the right environment to focus. The house I rented was in this semi-rural area. definitely quieter than what I was used to. You could still drive into town in about 20 minutes, but once you were home, it felt like things slowed down a lot. There were a few other houses scattered around, not close enough to feel like neighbors in the usual sense, but close enough that you'd notice if something changed. Mine was a single-story place with a backyard that backed into some trees. It was affordable, and at the time that mattered more than anything. I'd go to work during the day, come back in the evening, sit with my laptop and try to figure out how to build this online shop idea into something real. There was a routine to it, and I think I liked that more than I realized. Looking back, I think I was trying to convince myself I was more independent than I actually felt. Because living out there alone did get to me sometimes, especially at night when everything went quiet in a way that didn't feel entirely comfortable. The house next to mine wasn't occupied when I first moved in, or at least I never saw anyone there. Then, maybe a couple of weeks in, I noticed a trailer parked on that property and some movement around it. I didn't think much of it. People come and go. I don't know how to describe him in a way that doesn't sound exaggerated, because it wasn't like he was doing anything obviously wrong at first. It was more the way he carried himself. He looked weird. Something about his posture and the way he would stand still for too long, like he wasn't quite sure what to do with himself. The first time I saw him properly, he was just standing near the edge of his yard, looking in my direction. Just looking. At the time, I told myself, you move somewhere new, everything feels unfamiliar, so your brain kind of fills in the gaps with unnecessary worry. I went inside, made dinner, and didn't think about it again until the next day when I saw him again, a little closer. It became a pattern after that. I'd see him at different times, sometimes just standing, sometimes walking slowly around his yard, but there were moments where he would drift closer to the space between our houses, like he didn't really recognize the boundary. The first time he actually stepped into my backyard, I remember feeling this immediate discomfort that I tried to ignore. I had been outside, just hanging some clothes to dry, and I noticed him behind me without hearing him approach. That's the part that stuck with me the most, I think, the silence of it. I turned around and he was just there, a few steps inside my yard, looking at the ground like he was inspecting something. I asked him, as calmly as I could, if he needed something. He didn't answer. He kind of tilted his head, like he was processing the question, and then he said something that didn't really make sense. I can't remember the exact words now, but it was something about keeping things clean, or watching how things grow. It didn't sound like a response to what I asked. It sounded like he was continuing a conversation that hadn't actually happened. I told him, a bit more firmly, that this was my yard, and I'd prefer if he stayed on his side. He just nodded slightly and walked away, but even that felt strange because he didn't look back or acknowledge me again. It was like I had stopped existing for him the moment he turned. After that, it happened a few more times. I started anticipating it. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye and see him near the fence line, or sometimes already inside the yard. Every time I said something, he would leave, but always with those same odd, disconnected comments. Nothing threatening, just not right. I remember telling myself that if it got worse, I'd say something to someone, maybe call the landlord or even the police. But at the same time, I kept downplaying it. He wasn't doing anything aggressive. He wasn't touching anything. It felt like one of those situations where you worry you'll sound ridiculous if you report it. There was one day in particular that stands out because it felt like a shift, even though at the time I didn't fully recognize it. He came to my front door in the afternoon, which he hadn't done before. I was home, working on my laptop, and I heard a knock, just a few light taps. When I opened the door, he was standing there, closer than I had ever been to him before. I noticed details I hadn't picked up on from a distance. His clothes were worn in a way that didn't look like normal wear. It's like they had been used for things they weren't meant for. His expression was hard to read, almost blank, but there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. He asked if I needed someone to clean my backyard. That was the first time he had said something that sounded like a normal question, and for a second, I almost felt relieved. But then I remembered all the other interactions, and it didn't sit right. I told him no, that everything was fine, and I tried to keep it polite but short. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, like he was waiting for something else, and then he nodded and walked away. Again, no real transition, just that same abrupt shift where he seemed to disconnect. That night, I remember double-checking the doors more carefully. I told myself it was just being cautious, but there was this underlying feeling I couldn't shake. About a week later is when everything actually happened, and even now, when I try to think through it step by step, there are parts that feel blurred, not because I don't remember them, but because my mind keeps trying to make sense of something that doesn't fully make sense. It was late. I had already gotten ready for bed, brushed my teeth, turned off most of the lights. I was in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed, going through my usual routine of checking things before I went to sleep. I remember thinking I should do one last check of the house, which was something I had started doing more consistently since he showed up at my door. I opened my bedroom door expecting the hallway to be empty and dim, the way it always was at that hour. Instead, the first thing I saw was a figure standing just outside, close enough that if I had taken a step forward, I would have run into him. It just didn't register as real. Then everything kind of snapped into place all at once, and I realized it was him. But it wasn't just him being there. It was what he was wearing. He had on clothes that I recognized immediately. They were mine. A top I had worn earlier that week, something I had left in the laundry area. It was on him, stretched in a way that didn't fit properly, and for some reason that detail hit me harder than anything else. His face looked different up close in that lighting, like his expression didn't match the situation at all. He wasn't angry or aggressive. If anything, he looked almost intent, like he was focused on something only he understood. I remember feeling this cold, physical reaction in my chest, like my body knew what was happening before my mind caught up. And then he moved. It was sudden, like he had been waiting for that exact moment. He stepped toward me, and that's when everything finally broke through the shock. I slammed the bedroom door as hard as I could and locked it, almost missed the latch. I started screaming, even though I knew there was a good chance no one would hear me out there. I got my phone and called the police, trying to explain what was happening while listening for any sound on the other side of the door. I expected to hear something. Footsteps, banging, anything, but there was nothing. Just silence. That silence was almost worse than the noise would have been. It made it feel like he was still there, just standing on the other side, waiting. When the police arrived, I stayed in the room until they told me it was safe to come out. By the time I opened the door, the hallway was empty. There was no sign of him. It was like he had never been there at all. They searched the house. I tried to explain everything. Even as I was saying it out loud, parts of it sounded unreal. The officers took it seriously. I think they could tell I wasn't exaggerating. A few hours later, they found him in a trailer on his property. I didn't see it myself. He had been there the whole time, apparently, like nothing had happened. They arrested him, and that was the last direct connection I had to him. I moved out. I didn't feel comfortable staying. There was something about that house that felt permanently different after that night. It happened when I was in my early 20s. I was living with my parents in a rural area. You don't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen because nothing ever does. I'm Hannah. My life was simple. I was working part-time, saving up money, trying to figure out what I wanted to do long-term. Most days followed the same routine. Wake up early, help out around the house a bit, drive to work, come back in the afternoon, and just spend time at home. My parents both worked too, but their schedules were different. My dad would usually be out during the day, and my mom sometimes worked later shifts, so it wasn't unusual for me to be home alone for a few hours at a time. That day, it was sometime in the afternoon, not late at all. I had just gotten home from work, changed into more comfortable clothes, and I think I was in the kitchen making something small to eat. Just going through the motions like any other day. I heard a knock at the front door. People would occasionally stop by, sometimes neighbors, sometimes someone asking for directions since our area wasn't very well marked. I didn't think much of it at all. I remember being annoyed because I had just settled in. When I opened the door, there were two men standing there. I didn't recognize either of them. That alone wasn't strange, but something about them felt out of place. It's hard to explain exactly why. They weren't dressed badly or anything like that, just normal clothes, but they didn't look like they belonged in that area. Or maybe it was just the way they were standing, a little too still, like they were waiting for something specific. One of them asked me about a farm. He mentioned a name. I don't remember what it was now, but it wasn't anything I recognized. I told him I didn't know any farm by that name around there. That should have been the end of it, and technically it was. They didn't push or ask more questions. They just nodded and said something like, "All right," and turned to leave. But the part that stuck with me, even right then, was that as they were stepping away, both of them glanced past me into the house. Not just a quick look, but a deliberate one, like they were checking something. I remember feeling it more than thinking it, just this small shift in my stomach. People are curious. That's what I thought. I closed the door, locked it, and went back inside. For a few minutes, I stood there in the kitchen, just listening. I don't even know what I was expecting to hear. Eventually, I went to the front window and looked out, and I saw them walking down the road. They didn't look back again, at least not that I noticed. Later that evening, when my parents got home, I mentioned it. I didn't make it into a big deal. I just said that two guys had come by asking about a farm and that I didn't know what they were talking about. My dad asked a couple of questions, like what they looked like, but even then it didn't feel serious. It was more like passing conversation. Looking back, that was the first sign, the way they looked inside the house. At the time, I brushed it off completely. A few nights later, something happened. I wasn't awake for it, but my dad told me the next morning. He said he had been outside late, I think checking something near the driveway, and he noticed a car parked near the road. That alone was strange because we didn't really get random cars stopping out there. He called out just a simple hello, and as soon as he did, the car started up and sped off. He didn't chase it, but he said it didn't feel right. I remember him mentioning it in that same calm tone he used for everything, but there was a slight edge to it, like he was thinking more about it than he was saying out loud. At that point, I did think about the two men again, but I didn't connect it fully. It was more like a passing thought. It didn't feel like something that could escalate into anything serious. I think that's the part that bothers me the most now, how easy it was to dismiss everything. About a week after that, I was home alone. It was a similar time of day, a little later, but still not night. I remember the weather was kind of dull, slightly overcast, which made the house feel a bit dim, even though it wasn't dark outside. I was in my room, just lying on my bed. Then I heard something that didn't fit. A kind of dull thud, like something hitting wood, like pressure, like something was being pushed or forced. I got up, just trying to figure out what it was, maybe something outside. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard it more. It was coming from the back of the house. There was this heavy sound, like someone trying to break something open, but not quite succeeding yet. I didn't go all the way to the back door. I stopped partway down the hallway, just listening, and then there was a crack. A very distinct sound of wood splitting. After that, everything started happening faster, but it also felt strangely stretched out at the same time. The back door gave way, it swung inward slightly. I remember the exact moment I realized someone was actually coming into the house. It didn't feel real for a second, like my brain was trying to reject it. It was the same two men. There was no doubt about it. Even in that moment, with everything happening so quickly, I recognized them immediately. That alone made it worse. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. They had been there before. I turned to run, but I didn't get far. One of them grabbed me from behind. I couldn't just pull away. I remember the smell of his clothes, stale. My mind fixated on that for some reason. They were trying to pull me toward the back door. That much was clear. It wasn't chaotic in the way you might expect. It was controlled, like they knew exactly what they were trying to do. And then, right in the middle of it, one of them said something. He said, "Let's do it here. Let's do it here." The other one immediately responded, more tense, saying, "No, let's take her." They started arguing, pulling in slightly different directions, not fully coordinated anymore. It created this strange moment where the situation shifted from something directed at me to something between them. And then it escalated. They began physically pushing each other, still holding on to me at first, then letting go as the argument turned into a fight. It wasn't a long fight, just seconds, but it was enough. Enough for me to stumble away, enough for them to lose whatever plan they had. One of them shoved the other hard, and then suddenly they both just stopped, like something clicked. Without another word, they ran out the same way they came in. House was completely silent again. I remember my hands shaking, but everything else felt almost numb. I grabbed my phone and called the police. Then my parents. The police came, but by then there was nothing left to see except the broken door and the mess they had made coming in. I tried to explain what happened. They didn't find the men. No trace of where they went. Later, they told us they believed those men had been watching the house for some time, that the first visit wasn't random at all, that they were likely checking who was home, how many people lived there, things like that. After that, things changed in ways that are hard to explain unless you felt it. I couldn't be alone in the house without thinking about it. Every sound became something else in my head. I started checking locks constantly, sometimes multiple times in a row without realizing it. Years later, there are moments where it comes back. Even now, it doesn't feel like some distant memory that fades over time. It just kind of lingers there in the back of my mind. Sometimes it comes up for no reason, like when I hear a car slow down outside, or someone knocks unexpectedly. I'll replay that moment without meaning to, the way everything shifted so quickly. I don't think I would have gotten away if they hadn't turned on each other like that, even for a few seconds. That part never really leaves you.